So we'll continue with today's topic. So since last class we had seen different types of springs, we understood the different materials also, and we had a very interesting discussion on what are the different performances of different springs under loading. And more application wise also we saw where are those different kinds of springs are used. So today we'll start with some of the parameters that are associated. We'll look at two small derivations also, which will discuss the deflection and the uh, stresses induced in a coiled helical spring. Okay, so let me share the screen. Yeah. So when we talk about a spring, okay, for right now for our purpose, let us consider a compression spring and compression helical spring to be very precise. The concepts that I discussed here, the same can be carried off to other types of springs. Now this being the most commonly used spring and very easy to understand, we'll start with this. So this is a common compression spring, helical spring, helix in nature, and we know how the springs are. That is, if you cut through the spring in a cross section, okay, so if you cut through the spring in a cross section, so I'll just try to draw here in 3D fashion. It may not be entirely possible. Okay, so suppose say this is a spring and you slice through it. Okay, you have a plane which is slicing through it somewhere in center. Okay, so you'll cut through it and you will get a cross section somewhat like this. So what are the parameters associated with that? Now you imagine that you keep the spring on the table and you don't apply any load, and due to its nature, that is whatever its elasticity and plastic nature is there, both combined, now it will have a certain length which we call as a free length. Okay, it will have a certain length which we call as a free length. Now what does this free length mean? Free length means the length that is associated with unloaded condition. You are not applying any load on the top, you are not allowing it to compress, you are just keeping it at some surface as it is at room temperature, maybe without any temperature also, and it is just giving off some length. Okay, so such a length is called as free length. Okay, very obvious, very easy to understand. Now in the free length condition, or also called as, there's one more word called uncompressed state. Okay, uncompressed state of spring. In both these conditions, okay, that is either you call it as free length or an uncompressed state, you notice that each of those coils will have some distance, and we understand that if it is not a conical spring or a very different special kind of a spring, suppose it's just a normal spring, normal compression spring, the distance between each of those coils is, that is, if you measure a distance from one coil to the other, it is constant, and that constant is called as a pitch. So what is pitch? It is the axial distance between adjacent coils in an uncompressed state of spring. Okay, so axial distance, pitch, axial distance, so that distance is measured axially in an uncompressed state of spring. It is usually denoted by the letter small p. Why we use small p? Of course, in all the terminologies, whether you have seen in machine design also or in metrology lab, that letter P is already given to pitch even of a screw. Okay, so same terminology is continued here, P, and that same terminology is used in all your design data handbooks and textbooks. So that is why we will maintain the letter small p, small letter P, as the pitch. Okay, a very important parameter in design of a helical coiled spring. Okay. One more important parameter that we have is spring rate or stiffness, also called spring constant. Now there are, say, you have different 10, 15, 20 different types of helical springs and everything looks similar. But actually when you load it, it will be somewhat different. That is, one spring may compress more, the other spring may compress less. So just to give an idea how it might look like. So suppose say you have a spring like this equidistant coils, and you have a spring like this. Okay, both are in uncompressed state. Now you can understand that, okay, if I load something, which one will compress more? Okay, of course, it is not very easy to answer that question because it will depend on how thick the wire it is. One thing is very obvious. The wire that is used in making the spring will determine how the stiffness is. Okay, so what is stiffness? What are we talking about here? So you put, say something you put over here, say 10 kilos of load. Okay, so it will get deflected by some amount. The final state will be somewhat like this. Okay, now once you put it, then what happens? You may get a position somewhere over here. Say the bottom you are keeping it constant. After adding 10 kilos, the spring is compressed somewhat like this. What happens? Compression means the coils will move closer to each other. This pitch distance, whatever we had seen over here, it is going to alter. Correct? Of course, pitch is not defined once it gets compressed. Pitch is defined only in uncompressed state. I'm just saying for a reference that the distance between the coils will be reduced. So suppose you put 10 kilos, it will get displaced by something called Y, a displacement called Y. Okay, this is a displacement. Now if you put 10 kilos, Y. If it's a normal helical compression spring without any conical nature, whether the diameter is constant throughout, then what will you expect? You put 20 kilos, then the deflection will be double of this. If you put 30 kilos, then the deflection will be triple of this, and so on until it will get compressed until all the coils are going to touch each other. Correct? That means it will compress to an extent such a way that if once the coils touch each other, then there is no more spring action. It will behave as a solid block or as a solid rod. Okay. Now, what is spring stiffness here? Coming back to our discussion. What is spring constant or spring stiffness? Force required to produce unit amount of deflection. We saw the deflection in 10, we saw the deflection in 20 or 30. What about if I say 1 kg or 1 Newton of load? Usually it is expressed in Newton per meter. Okay, this is expressed in Newton per meter. In other words, how many newtons of load you have to put in order to displace the spring by 1 meter. Okay, that is a stiffness or spring constant, or also some textbooks and reference books also give the name as spring rate. So very important parameter in selection of a spring. Okay, with the load that is given for an automobile, if you want to say pick out a spring, then this is the first thing you will look at. Okay, what should be the stiffness of the spring? How stiff the spring should be? Should it get deflected by a huge amount when say 1 ton is added, or should it be deflected by a small amount? Just to give a reference as just an example sake, you will understand that the spring, maybe both say six-wheeler vehicles. For example, one six-wheeler vehicle, that is a truck, will have a large amount of payload. It will have some stiffness value. Okay, and obviously we are going to give it more stiffness because the loadings vary by a huge amount, and we would not like the load to deflect the spring by a huge amount. Whereas the same vehicle, if you want it to be carry people whose comfort of the ride is a major criteria, then you would put less stiffer springs. Why? Because you require more action. Okay, more action on the suspension. So that is why stiffness is an important criteria when deciding which kind of spring you wish to put for the vehicle. Okay, before I move on to the concept of spring index, let me just define what is this D, Di and DO. Okay, so when you hold a spring, okay, when you hold a spring or keep it in uncompressed state, you know it is made up of a wire. Once the wire is wound, whether it is hot rolled or cold drawn in any process, finally it will achieve a shape like this with some distance in between. First of all, the wire that is used in making the spring, we call it wire diameter, and this is represented by this small letter d over here. Okay, the wire diameter. This is shown through cut section. Okay, and that remains the same throughout. For most of the springs, I can say 99.9% of the springs, it will remain same throughout. Very special springs, it might vary. Okay, but this d, small letter d, for all purposes is called as a wire diameter. That is also described here in this formula over here. Okay, wire diameter d. Next, coming back to the other parameters, once in unloaded condition, the spring inner diameter, if you use a caliper, if you might remember, you use the same concept when doing the strength of materials lab, where spring testing machine was used and the helical spring was tested. So use the inner caliper and measure the distance inside. So that is di. Okay, this is di, and this is outside is outside is do. So di is the inner diameter of the coil. Remember, this is the wire diameter. This refers to the coil. So di, capital Di is the inner diameter of the coil, and outside is the outer diameter of the coil. Wire has only one diameter, which we call as wire diameter. Okay. Now, what about D here? D is the mean. Okay, the top one that you see is the mean diameter. In other words, Di plus Do by 2. Okay, we can write it here. D is equal to Di plus Do by 2 is the mean diameter of the coil. Why this is necessary? Because all calculations will be based on this mean diameter, which is taken as the mean of inner and outer. Okay, so mean is calculated somewhere over here, somewhere in between. Okay, the centroid of the wire diameter, I can say. So from here to here, so this distance taken horizontally is called as the mean coil diameter, or also simply called coil diameter. Okay, mean coil diameter. Now you have a ratio between these two, that is mean coil diameter to the wire diameter, which we call as a spring index. Okay, another important parameter called the spring index. So what does the spring index actually indicate? It indicates the sharpness of the curvature of the coil. Sharpness of the curvature. Okay, how sharp is the coil? It is not to say that it is a knife-like structure or something like a pointed structure. It does not mean like that. Sharpness means, for example, when looking from the top, okay, if you look at the same spring from the top, then how will it appear? It appears as simply a circle. So this is one kind. But at the same time, if you have the same wire diameter and if you wound it very tightly like this, then you would understand the difference. Okay, same wire diameter. Suppose say this is the wire diameter when looking from the top, but if you do that same thing over here, it will be very closely hit. Okay, so the same wire diameter, if I want to use here, then it means it is more sharp or the curvature is quite high. Okay, so a low spring index means high sharpness of curvature. A low spring index means high sharpness of curvature. Okay, so there are some levels of sharpness. For example, when C is less than 3, actual stresses in the wire are excessive due to the curvature effect. Now there are two things here to understand. See, the stresses when you load this spring, for example, if I put W over here, okay, say a weight is added W, so this W is acting over here, then the whole spring starts getting compressed, all the coils move relative to each other, and now there are some stresses acting on the coil. Okay, anything that is stressed, okay, we can say that there are two effects here. One is the loading effect that is happening around it. The second is the curvature effect. Already the spring has been kind of given a pre-tension due to the curvature effect. So where it has occurred, how it has occurred so far? Because you have turned and twisted it in the plastic state. You are forced it to turn, correct? The normal tendency of the wire is to remain as a wire, but you have applied some temperature, hot rolled it between some rollers, and finally the end effect is it has been curved forcefully into a coil. Now that will carry some curvature effect. Okay, so actual stresses in the wire are excessive due to the curvature effect, particularly when C is less than 3. C is less than 3. So such cases happen. You see mathematically what is this? This is d by d. That means C less than 3 means the mean coil diameter is not that large. It is small when compared to the wire diameter itself. Okay. So suppose I'll give an example. Say just take say C is equal to 3. What can you tell? If this is 10, then the wire diameter should be coil diameter should be 30. If the wire diameter is 10, then the coil diameter should be 30. Then what will be the gap remaining here? So this is 10 is the wire diameter we are talking about. Then entirely here the coil diameter is 30. That means the gap in between is only hardly 10. Okay, so it is a very thick wire being wound, forcefully wound in a very small coil. So that is why the stresses are excessive due to the curvature effect in such cases. What if you have a very large number, say C is equal to greater than 15? Okay, say example sake, wire diameter is still 10 mm and this has gone to around 300. Then you have, relative to the coil, the wire appears very thin, correct? So large variation in coil diameter. The problem with such kinds of springs is that it's prone to buckling. Where is this concept of buckling? Maybe you have heard this. Buckling occurs in long and slender columns. So you have a very long pole which has been, okay, say you are holding it at one end, then due to its own weight or some axial weight that is acting on it, even a very slight amount of load can make it to buckle or cause twist and turn. Okay, the best example we can give is of a flagpole, very long and thin column. If there is a more weight on the top of the flagpole, then it will start to buckle. Similarly, if it is a very thin thin wire when compared to the coil, then it is prone to buckling and tangles easily during handling. Tangles means this is a very easy concept to understand. Say you keep 2 or 3 springs very nearby in very close proximity, then what happens if they get tangled? It is very difficult to separate them later on, correct? If you have pen springs, that is springs that are used in your writing pen, you remove them and keep it closer, and by somehow if they come closer and they get entangled, then it is very difficult to pull them apart. Why? Because there is so much large space in between, so that foreign material or other springs can come in and tangle itself. So that is why the C greater than 15 also we want to avoid. So C less than 3 we want to avoid, C greater than 15 we want to avoid. So what are the design considerations? Usually the spring index varies from 4 to 12. Okay, usually it goes from 4 to 12. Suppose say you would like to have something greater than 15 which is really required over there, then how would you go across the situation, go around the situation? Then what you would do is you would put a guide path. Okay, let the spring be very slender, no problem, but so that it does not buckle, you put a guide path in between or give a space in between, say a barrel or a hollow tube in between, so that it does not deviate or have a lateral deflection, so that the buckling is not possible. So that can be done. Okay, such arrangement can be done, but usually we don't go to that extent. We go from 4 to 12. And in all the calculations, as we can see in the future problems also, usually the spring index comes as 6, 7, 8 and so on. Okay, so this is the standard way that people are using the springs. Okay, some other things, just...
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
What does the large variation in coil diameter mean for C greater than 15?
Hold on. Hold on, students. Slide is stuck. Yeah. What is the question again?
So for C is greater than 15, it says it results in large variation in coil diameter. What does that mean?
Large variation, that is what I said. Now I just give an example. So this is the one you can take an example, 300 by 10. So in this case, what happens? This is 30, right? Even if you take 150 also, it is 15. But
Okay,
anyway,
large variation means large difference between the equality
yes, yes, yes,
diameter and wire
yes,
diameter.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Compared to the coil, this wire seems to be very thin. Okay. Compared to the coil is 300 mm diameter, but the wire itself is only 10 mm diameter. Okay. So such large variation with respect to each other, it is always relative. See what you are actually doing. You are comparing the coil to the wire. Okay. C is the one quantity, you are comparing the coil to the wire. So you can have a spring where it is a very large coil, but the wire diameter is thin. Okay. So that is maybe that is the I can say the essence of this entire statement, saying large variation in coil diameter. Of course, we would like to have some springs. Application wise, we can think of soft cushions or soft sofas in furniture. Okay, as I told you in the previous class also, if you open along with the coir and along with all the sponge and foam material, you will have a spring, and the springs usually will be close to 15 here, 12, 13, 14. You will have a very thin wire which is coiled to a very large diameter. Only such coils will give you the action that is necessary for a very soft seating in furnitures. So usually 10, 12, 14 range, the furnitures will use it. And coming to the other side, maybe 4, 5, 6, this is regular automobile handling. Okay, we never use something close to 12 or 14. Okay. Okay, yeah. We will continue with other things. Okay, free length we have already discussed. Unloaded condition. The coils are equidistant from each other, and such a case we understand the pitch length between each adjacent coil. So that is called as the pitch. Suppose say you begin compressing. Okay, you put enough of load such that all the coils will move together. Okay, all the coils will move, and the gap closes in. It becomes closer and closer and closer, and finally it will achieve something called solid length. Very easy to understand. Axial length of the spring, which is the adjacent coils, touch each other. The moment it touches each other, we call it the solid length, because this will no longer behave as a spring later on. Further, any inclusion of the load, it is simply a metal block sitting over there, because there is no action. Only when you remove the load, the spring action will start. So that is why it is called a solid length. Okay, spring is completely compressed. And what is a solid length now? Now you can understand what is this solid length. Suppose I want to measure this. I want to measure this solid length. Okay, what will be the solid length? Now given that you have a wire diameter d, you just have to multiply with the total number of coils called I. Okay, I into d will give you the total solid length or distance of that particular spring. Okay, next is called as compressed length. Now compressed length means you apply some amount of load. Okay, and usually that load we call it as P max. Of course, we agree that this P has to be the maximum in order for all the coils to touch each other, but at the same time, we would never go to this extent in designing. What do I mean by that? That means we never consider a possibility, or we never design to a range where the coils will be touching each other. In all the cases, we would like to limit this load in such a way that though the spring is compressed, we would like to retain some gap. Some gap has to be there between those coils, because the spring action has to be felt. Okay, and there are other reasons, other vibrational problems also associated with that. That we'll be discussing in future classes. What is that? So, axial length of the spring that is subjected to a maximum compressive force. When I say maximum, doesn't mean that it will all touch each other. looking from the design standpoint, the maximum that is allowed in the spring. Okay. When the spring is subjected to maximum force, there should be some gap or clearance between the adjacent coils. Okay. And if there is no gap, what happens? There is clashing of coils. Okay. Now how to take that? How much is the amount that we should take? It is assumed that it's gap of 1 or 2 mm between the adjacent coils. Okay. And usually the total axial gap, that is, you have one gap over here. So this is one amount as depicted here. Hello. Hello. Please keep your mics muted. Okay. Yeah. So there is one gap over here. There is a second gap. There is a third gap, and so on. So all those gaps, if you add up, that is called as a total axial gap, usually taken as 15% of the maximum deflection. 15% of the maximum deflection that is allowed. Okay. When we solve the problems, you'll be more clear on that. Okay. Now the total gap is I minus 1 because there are I number of coils. So what is a coil? If you have one turn, for example, let me just try to draw it here. What is that one coil? For example, you start from here. This is one coil. Then second coil will be from here to here. This is second coil. This is third coil, fourth coil, and so on. Now there are 4 coils here. Okay. So coming to the total gap, it is I minus 1. If there are 4, this is 4 minus 1, which is 3 into gap between adjacent coils, because the first and the last will be adjacent to each other, right? So that is why we take the gap between. So how much gap set is there for 4? For example, 1, 2, and 3 gaps only. So that is why we take I minus 1 into gap between adjacent coils. That will define the total gap. Okay. Free length we have already discussed. Axial length of an unloaded helical spring. And free length, if since I already described what is compressed length and solid length, we can understand it like this. Free length can be defined as compressed length plus maximum deflection, or free length is equal to solid length plus maximum compression plus total clearance between the adjacent coils. Okay. Does anyone have a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, that 15% of the maximum deflection that you mentioned in compressed length, the gap that's essential to prevent clashing of the coils.
Yeah.
So total gap is I minus 1 times gap between adjacent coils. That gap between adjacent coils, is that 15% of total deflection?
It's a kind of a reverse calculation. You see, we set the gap in such a way that it is 15% of the maximum deflection which is allowed under design load. Okay. As I told you, maximum load is not where it is going to solid length. We agree that here in this case, when you compare this and this, P max looks lesser, right? Yes, of course it is lesser. Because why we are saying that? Because in order to go to clashing, P will be much higher than what is P max. So that is why I told P max is something like a design load, or the maximum that can be allowed for that particular application. Now, what is the maximum deflection that is allowed? Say this is the free length here. Let me come back here. Free length, this is a compressed length. Say delta is the maximum that is allowed. Okay. So out of that, this delta into 0.15, which is 15%, is taken as the total axial gap. Okay, the total axial gap that has to be maintained between the coils. Okay, I think when we are going to solve problems after a short time, so I think that will be more clear. Can you hold on till that time? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, one more important concept of active and inactive coils. Now that we have already discussed the parameters, active coils. What is this active and inactive coils? So any coil for that matter. So we'll take an example of a suspension system itself. Say for example you have a chassis, okay, and there is a rocker arm or something like that. Okay, very typical. And here you have the bearing on which the wheel is mounted. Now you want a spring to be attached like this. Okay, spring to be attached so that it will give a action of suspension. Now this spring we know has to be connected to something. We already described it as a flexible joint, but not so flexible so as to come out of the domain or system. So we have to fix it somewhere over here, that is upper part, and also the lower part is also relatively fixed, that is fixed to the axle of the vehicle. So when fixing, what will you fix? You will fix a portion of the coil itself. Okay, so something like this. So first coil is here, the second coil, third coil, fourth coil, fifth coil, and so on. Now you want to fix something. Usually the first part is, okay, the first coil is fixed, and here the bottom part, last coil, is fixed. Now what happens now? Though you have 5 coils or 6 coils, the first and the last coil, okay, the first and the last coil, these both are not going to take part under compression because they are already fixed. There is no point or no action for them to perform. Though it is a coil, though it is defined as a coil, the first and the last coil is not going to give any action. Okay, no spring action is available for the first and the last coil. So now you got the point. What are active coils now? The coils which are actually taking part, that is in between coils, are called active, and the first and the last coils are called inactive. Okay, so portion of the end coils which is in contact with the seat but do not contribute to the spring action are called inactive coils, and active coils are obviously the supports external load and deflects under the action of the force. So what are the number of inactive coils? Just a simple equation to remember. I dash is the total number of active coils, and I should say this is not active coils, total number of coils. Hello? Yeah, it should not be active coils over here. It should be total number of coils, and this should be number of active coils. So I dash minus I should give you inactive coils. Okay. Depending on how the coils are placed, there are different types. So let me just mention here. Anyway, we are going to design this and take into consideration from the design data handbook also later on. So what are some of the coils? If you look at the section, that is both the top view and the front view, we'll get an idea. See, this is called plain end, the first one. Okay, how does it differ? We'll see. Plain end, you see the profile here, it is still slant. Okay, this is the axis, straight vertical down. As a reference, we can, okay, let me put a ground here. Okay, this is the flat surface everywhere. This is the flat surface. Now with respect to the flat surface, as you can see that this is inclined. This is inclined. So such coils are called plain end. So what you are doing, maybe you are having a large coil, you are cutting it out. You are cutting at some point. Okay, you are calculating first coil, second coil, third coil. Okay, I want 4 or 5 coils for this. Then you are just cutting out the wire and just leave it as it is for the application. We call it plain end coils. Next, what some coils are there, what you do is after removing that, you use a grinder and make it flat. You see, this is the horizontal line of reference and this is flat. This is flat over here, this is flat. So both you make it flat. So this is plane and ground. So what does this, how does this help? So this ensures that there is a proper seating, correct? The adjoining surface is usually flat. Okay, they will otherwise for plane and what you have to do is the surface itself you have to make it inclined or conical shape and so that it will accommodate over there. Otherwise this will not be seated over there. It will be continuously vibrating with insufficient seating. Whereas when you have a ground, or ground means you use a grinder to taper off the surfaces to a flat. Okay, so that is called as plane and ground. Then you have the squared ones, that is the last coil. What you do is you twist, slightly give it a twist such that you need not ground it off, but the last coil is made at one totally 90 degrees to the axis. Okay, you are not using a grinder here, but the last coil you purposely twist it in such a way that this will have a 90 degree or orthogonal surface to the axis. And notice what has happened here. In first two kinds, the gap between the coils is maintained as it is, whereas here you see the gap is closing in at the last and the first coil. It is almost touching here. Okay, because of this first and the last coil, you are not giving a helix fashion, you are just putting it as a cylindrical way. And lastly, you can understand now what is squared and ground. You are doing both the squaring and totally grinding of the surface such that the entire spring will stay as it is on its seat. Okay, very stable. But one disadvantage that we have in this is, since it is square and ground, as I already told you, the last coil may touch the adjacent coil. That means anyway the first and last coil are not going to give you any action, and they themselves become one single unit. Okay, so the suspension action or the active coils will start only from here itself. Okay, from the second coil. There is no option for it to use all the coils. Okay, so that is one disadvantage that we have. Okay, so this is just one more representation. The same four things. Okay, square end and ground, plane end ground, and square end not ground. Okay, so these are different types that you can see. Okay, let us come to the equation now. What are the equations that we are supposed to understand? After having described how the loading is and what do you mean by small d, which is the wire diameter, and d being the mean coil diameter. Now, what are the stresses that are acting on the spring? So that we need to understand. Okay. Once a spring is loaded, we understand that it is subjected to two different kinds of forces. One is not forces, sorry, stresses. Okay. So what are those? So one is a torsional shear and one is a direct shear. In other words, see, we understood that what is a helical coil or a helical spring. A helical spring means a long wire which has been forced into becoming a spring. Okay, you are winding it, plastically deforming it to become a spring. Now when you apply a load, okay, the wire or the cross section is subjected to both a torsional shear and a direct shear. So it's like you are holding the spring on one end. What is the equivalent thing you can think of? It is something like it's a long wire, you are holding it at one end and trying to twist the other end. So that is why it is called as torsional shear. The action that a torsional rod or a torsional wire it is giving, the same action is felt in the spring material once it is plastically wound to give a spring. Okay. In addition to that, there is always a concept of direct shear. So a tendency of this load is to shear off the spring, and that is exactly how springs fail. Okay. Under very high load or shock loads, what happens? If there is a minute crack, it will gradually propagate and shear off the material itself. So that is how the direct shear works. Okay. What is the criteria for a helical spring? Say for if it is something like a beam or anything that bends, we already used what analogy we used. See, it has a sagging moment or a hogging. So in whichever case, the bending stresses sigma b came into existence, and also the Young's modulus gained popularity. Whereas here, since it is twisting moment, rigidity modulus is important. The rigidity modulus of the spring material is important because we are dealing with torsional shear. Okay. Next, if W is the axial load on the spring and maximum shear stress induced in the wire is tau, let us give it some symbols. Okay. C is equal to D by D, spring index, that is coil diameter to the wire diameter. P, as mentioned, small, that is pitch of the coils, and delta is a deflection as a result of an axial load W. Then you can say the torque on the spring is W into D by 2. So in other words, you are applying W at one far end and the distance of application is D by 2, that is the radius of the coil. And if you use the elementary, that is, if you equate it to the torsional equation, pi d cube by 16 into tau. So where we got this equation from? You can think of what you did in shafts. See, in shafts also you had a very similar equation. The same equation we are using here. Why shafts? Because it was related to torsional shear. Correct? So maybe you use it in other form, but this equation, okay, torsional equation is also applicable over here. And if you equate this, that is the torque applied to the torsional shear stress that is induced, you have tau 1 is equal to 8wd by pi d cube. Okay, and maybe in some textbooks this W is, in your data handbook especially, the W is replaced by F. Okay. So as discussed, you have.
Sir, could you repeat the part about Young's modulus?
Yeah. Young's modulus I just mentioned, it is not relevant in terms of helical springs. See, Young's modulus gained importance because we were dealing with bending stress. Okay. Sigma B, just example I gave you was of a beam where it is simply supported, you load something and there is stress over here and you are interested in bending stress. Okay, you catch any other beam. For example, you have, okay, let me give a similar example of a cantilever beam. A cantilever beam also will have bending stress and the important property there is Young's modulus. The same beam, if you give a twisting moment, what becomes important? Rigidity modulus becomes important.
But sir, for the direct shear, Young's modulus would be important, right?
Direct shear, Young's modulus. No, we are talking about shear stress here. Shear stress. Shear stress. Not bending stress.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Sir, that free body diagram, can you go back to it, please?
This one?
Yeah, the torque represented there,
yeah,
it's shown anti-clockwise. Shouldn't it be clockwise?
That might be the case, but anyway, that is not so important here. We are not taking that. This is just for a derivation purpose. Okay. That's fine. That I agree with you. That maybe clockwise and anti-clockwise, it has to be interchanged or something. But yeah, that it is not exactly important over here. Okay. So we will just dwell on what are the forces that are acting. Okay. Yeah. So direct shear stress due to the load W and the shear stress due to the curvature of the wire. So this is what we told in addition to the torsional shear stress. Okay, torsional shear is totally valid over there. Then we have direct shear stress due to the load W and the stress due to curvature of the wire. So this what is this? This is a representation of C, how close it is when compared to the wire diameter, how close is the coil diameter. Okay, so this is the stress due to the curvature. Now you have to include all those components into one single. Okay. Now, if I talk only about direct shear stress, it is a very simple formula, load by cross-sectional area. So, considering that the cross-sectional area is circular, we can say that W by pi d square by 4 or 4W by pi d square is the formula for direct shear stress. Do I have it in the next slide? Just hold on. Just let me. Yeah. So just going to the concept here, torsional shear stress is something like this. Okay, this is the representation of that. Direct shear stress, as you know, it comes uniformly distributed through the central plane of the cross section. So resultant torsional shear and direct shear stress. If you add curvature, then again the profile will change. Resultant torsional shear, direct shear and curvature shear stress diagram. Okay, so this is how the variation of the stresses are there. Now, one thing you might notice, say torsional shear stress, this is equal and opposite to each other, being a circular cross section of the wire. I'm not talking about the coil, okay, I'm talking of the wire cross section. This is the wire cross section. So on this wire cross section, you have equal and opposite on each other. You have direct shear stress on which it is equal throughout. So the resultant, you can see, if this is the axis of the spring in between, the inner edge gets more stress. Inner edge always gets more stress, and that is further amplified when you have the curvature effect. Why? Because the spring is curved from the inside. So this inner edge again over here has the most amount of stress. In other words, you account for this inner edge stress, rest all the things are taken care of. Okay, if you take care of this, okay, at inner edge you select a suitable diameter, you select a suitable material, rigidity modulus, suitable heat treatment, then once this inner edge issue is solved, then outer edge you need not worry about, because that is already taken care, because the maximum you have already taken care in the inner edge. So that is why this curvature effect also is a huge bearing on this. Okay, we have it in slide.
Why is it high?
Yeah.
So why is it high? The inner edge stress, why is that higher?
Hold on. Yeah. This inner edge is higher because, see, this is the axis of the spring. As I told you, you have a large wire which you are forcing it to coil. When you force it to coil, the radius of curvature is the least in the inner edge rather than the outer edge. Got it? The radius of curvature at this surface will be the least. That is why this is forced to bend more, okay? Forced to plastically deform more over here, and that is why this is kind of already stressed over here. So curvature shear stress is already there while manufacturing. When loading, you are additionally putting it torsional shear and direct shear, and this all the combination of all those three, you will get a very high stress in the inner edge itself. I think that should have answered your question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hello, please keep your mics muted. Yeah. So maximum shear stress induced in the wire is torsional shear stress plus direct shear stress. Again, let us come back to that. We have a small adjustment to do here. You see, torsional shear stress, we told ourselves, okay, 8 WD by pi d cube. Sometimes it is also called 8 FD by pi d cube. Why I am stressing on this point is because in the design data handbook F is used instead of W. Okay, plus 4 W by pi d square, which is the direct shear stress. So this is this component, this is this component. When you put it together, okay, you put a common denominator pi d cube outside. So in order to adjust that, you will get 1 plus d by 2d. 1 plus d by 2d. What is d by d in the reverse way? It is nothing but C, or spring index. So you can write this as 8WD by pi d cube into 1 plus 1 by 2C. Now 8WD by pi d cube can be defined as a constant for a given spring. Okay, so because d and d are constants, okay, and W is the load acting on the spring. What they have done is K suffix S, they have given it as a shear stress factor. This is the component they have isolated in order to understand what is the factor of the stress considering shear, that is 1 plus 1 by 2c. Now both direct shear as well as curvature, see this K suffix S is only for what? Torsional shear stress and direct shear stress. Still something has not been included. What is that? Curvature has not been included. Now how to include curvature in this? Because curvature also has a lot of effect on the design. Okay, because you are usually using a cold I can say cold drawn spring, so that is plastically deformed, so there will be severe stresses on it already at the especially at the inner edge, so you will have to put that into consideration also. So curvature of the wire is very important, as if you particularly when C has less value. Now what happened, one of the researchers, Wall, okay, by AM Wall his name is, so he introduces stress factor K. It is still called Wall's stress factor K. Okay, the resultant diagram of torsional direct shear, that is what we just now we looked at in the previous slide, and when we include everything, this Ks is replaced by K, which is given by this relationship. How did he find this relationship? How did we get this? This is purely empirical in nature. Okay, he did some calculations of his own and maybe came across this figure, but this is what we use for most of the, for all the springs, unless or otherwise mentioned, we directly go for this. If he says neglect curvature effect, then we don't use this. Okay, I repeat, if this is when all the three things, that is torsional, direct and curvature effect is felt, all three. When only torsional and direct shear is there, then you can happily use 1 plus 1 by 2c. Otherwise, you use K is equal to 4c minus 1 by 4c minus 4 plus 0.615 by c. So for different values, how does it look, the curvature? So this is the variation. You see the spring index is quite lesser. So 3 was our threshold as mentioned, and on the other side 15 was our threshold. Just see what happens. Above 15, it is almost going to be a constant. In other words, the stress factor does not bother much. Though there is some effect, it does not bother much so as to cause a failure of the spring. But whereas the spring index comes down, okay, 15 to 14, 13, it gradually, the stress factor will go up and up and up until after it crosses the threshold of 3, it will go severely high. Okay, and of course beyond that I don't think a spring can be even manufactured. Okay, d by d value, that is capital D by small letter d of 2 makes no sense because there is absolutely no inner diameter over there. So that is why we can stop it over here. Okay, somewhere around 2.5 or so. And even if a diameter can be made of such a small diameter, inner diameter can be made, it will never give the spring action. So that is why we can happily say, okay, below 3, of course, severely stressed, above 15, very least stressed. We need not consider at all the curvature effect. And here in between range, usually our ranges are 6, 7, 8 and so on. So this is the most comfortable range that we are using. We will have to give some stress factor over here. For example, 6 has a stress factor of around 1.3 or 1.35 somewhat. Okay, I think it is 1.26. Okay, somewhat here. Okay. So this is a variation of stress factor and spring index. Okay. I think with all this in mind, we can go on to problems. Further things I think we can discuss over there. Okay. Oh yeah, one more thing is there, that is deflections. I just forgot. Yeah, we'll consider deflections now. So if you take a cross section of a spring wire, we know there is one length of the coil into number of active coils. Okay, total length of one coil is Okay, pi d into n. What is that pi d? See, as we told you, you have a wire, a very long wire. That length is called L. Total active length of the wire is called L. So this is one big wire from first to the last. You are coiling it. Now what will be, once a coil is given to you, how do you measure? How do you do the reverse calculation? What is the length of the wire used? You simply use what is the circumference of one coil and multiply with number of coils. You use the circumference of one coil, which is pi d, multiply with number of active coils, you will give the total active length of the wire. And let theta be the angular deflection of the wire when acted upon by torque T. So the same wire, you are putting a torque T. Okay. Then the actual deflection of the spring delta is given by theta into d by 2. Theta into d by 2 is the actual deflection of the spring. So we know that from very basic principles, T by J is equal to G theta by L. This is one basic equation you have learned in strength of materials, which you also call as a torsional equation. Okay. T is the torque, J is the polar moment of inertia, and G is the rigidity modulus, theta is the deflection, and L is the length of for that deflection. Okay, so these are the things describing it. T by J is equal to G theta by L. Okay.
Sir, how did you get that formula? Delta is equal to theta into d by 2.
This is the actual deflection of the spring, man. See, okay, just to give an analogy, in analytical geometry, if you have a theta here, theta is this, then this is what, this is d by 2. The spring will deflect by an angle theta. Okay, theta into d by 2. Okay, this is delta. Delta is equal to theta into d by 2. Got it?
But sir, isn't the deflection an axial measurement?
Oh, okay, you are saying like that. See, hold on. Actual, maybe I have to use something like this. Derivation wise, it is quite high. What we are trying to understand here is, see, deflection of the wire. See, this deflection of the wire we are interested in, theta. As I told you, you are considering it as a torsional deflection. So you are holding the wire at one end, you're turning by twisting moment. That we are finding out what is this theta. Got it?
Yes, sir, but I don't understand how that theta is the angular deflection, right? So it should give the twist of the wire, but
Yeah,
that
correct.
delta is axial deflection of the spring.
It should be phi, I guess.
No. We are using theta itself. No, 5. There are other considerations. We can you see for a if you consider a wire lamp something like this. See, a spring like this. The moment you load it, the moment you start loading it, there is one deflection which we call y, the actual deflection. Okay. The total deflection. Maybe the terminology here is a little bit confusing, but there are how many deflections you see. See, this is one total deflection. That is, once loaded, the whole coil will deflect. Next, what will happen to the wire? The wire will experience a deflection in its own axis. That is, it will start turning. So that is one more called theta. Okay. As a whole, what is the tendency of the spring? It will start to bulge out slowly. Well, maybe very small, but yeah, slowly it will start to bulge out. Okay, so that is a third deflection. Of course, this is a highly complex thing, but coming back to your question, I think. Yeah.
Sir,
Yes.
the thing is,
Yeah.
a slant wire, right? from the axis, it is d by 2, right? The diameter, it's d by 2, right? Mean diameter. So when we subject the spring to compression, there is an axial deflection, which is actually d by 2 sine theta. If we look at the geometry, it is d by 2 sine theta, and for small angles, it's becoming d theta, d by 2 theta. So
yes,
therefore,
I agree with you. Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking, sir. So
Okay,
small
okay,
angles.
now I understand.
Yeah. So for small angles, yes, that is also there because we are going to approximate it. We cannot take each and every small angle over there. So that is why. Yes. In that sense, you are right. Yes. It is
So,
signed.
so this delta is that y that you drew, right?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Why is? Let me come back now. Wait.
Sir, I can tell you if you draw a right angle triangle. Draw a right angle triangle with the hypotenuse length equal to d by 2.
Hypotenuse length.
And the height of the triangle will be the axial gap between the coils.
Anyway, this is not there in your notes also, but I was just trying to give you some information. Let me check. Yeah. Okay, students. Well, can we have the discussion later? Well, I'll just finish off this one particular thing. Maybe you'll get some idea later. Okay, but I'll definitely come back to you. But anyway, this is not mentioned in your notes as such. This is maybe not part of your derivation. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how these equations have come. Now, this formula T by J, hold on, yeah. T by J into G theta by L, as I mentioned, it is of a wire. We are still maintaining that it is of a wire subjected to some torsion. The twist felt in the wire is theta. T by J is equal to G theta by L. What is L? L is the length of the wire that has been used to make the spring. Okay, T by J is equal to G theta by L, and these all the usual notations. Let us go next. What happens? T by J, G theta by L, you rearrange it, TL into J into G, and put the equivalent form, that is W into D by 2. This is pi dn, this we discussed. Polar moment of inertia, pi by 32 into D to the power 4 into G. So then substituting the value of this theta in the equation, that is, as just mentioned by you people also previously, that maybe this word is getting us a little bit confused, but the angular deflection theta, that is correct, whatever we understood. Length is correct, whatever we understood. Theta into D by 2 is the deflection of the spring, maybe from looking from the top. Yes, what is his name? Prabhu, no? Hello?
Sir, I
Yeah.
can help. I can tell you, sir.
Yeah.
Can you draw two circles, two cross sections axially?
You mean with respect to the previous figure?
No, sir. Just draw two. Just draw a portion of the spring cross section. Yeah, one
Like this,
circle
looking
and
from the top?
axially. Yeah, no, not below, not from the top, from the front only, sir. Like a cut section view of the spring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and axially below you draw another portion. That is not relevant, sir. Like, yeah. Now, sir, the axial distance between those two, right?
Yes.
So the slant portion is one coil, right, sir? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
sir. I've sent it on a class group, sir. Actually, so the don't consider the next, the next circle. Like consider one slant portion and draw a horizontal line on both the circles. Right, the distance between those two, yeah.
You mean to say this one you're talking about?
Yeah, that and the next circle, right? Right after that, there is a circle, right? No, the other one on the right. Yeah, yeah. So these lines from the centers, right? If we draw that vertical distance is delta. That vertical, and from the axis, right? There is a slant distance, right? That is d by 2. Now this can be visualized as a right angle triangle. Just draw a right angle triangle, sir, and I can tell you.
Yeah, no. What is the point now with this? No, this is the right angle triangle you are considering. This one.
Yeah. Then
or even like this. I think this is also fine.
Yeah, that only I'm considering. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One horizontal line from the axis and one horizontal line from the center of the cross section. The distance between those two lines is delta, and the slant distance from the axis is d by 2. That inclination of that slant line from the horizontal
excuse
is
me,
theta.
Sir, I sent the photo that Srinivasa sent on the group in the chat. You can see it.
Chart. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, it's very two different kinds of things here. Okay, let me get back to you. I'm not having the material right now with me. But what you explained is fine, and I agree with you. Theta, delta.
If you make that right angle triangle, right?
Okay. Okay. So I think so you are saying this is theta, correct? This is d by 2.
Yes, sir. So it's not actually d by 2 sine theta, it's d by 2 tan theta. And for small angles, tan theta becomes
tan
theta.
won't come over there.
If you draw a right angle triangle, right, sir, I can help you. Just draw a right angle triangle.
Yeah. Okay, fine. We can have the discussion later if you don't mind. Okay. And one more thing. There are to approach the same amount kind of problem. There are different ways also. Yeah. Of course, I agree with your way also. Fine.
But sir, in this way, that theta is not the angle of twist, right?
Yeah, sure. It should be phi, right? Or some other angle.
Yeah, that terminology is a little.
Terminology is a little bit confusing. Yeah. I agree with that, students. Yeah. Terminology has actually created some confusion. But this concept is the same concept. And finally, the expression I'll show you is that delta should be this term 8 WC cube by GD into N. Okay. I have actually two derivations with me right now, but yeah, I think I need to draw and show you, which is a little bit tedious. Maybe in next class, I will by next class I will be able to draw it correctly and show you. Okay.
Sir,
because
actually,
as a frame of reference, as I told you, you have to look it from both the front as well as the top view. There are two deflections going on simultaneously. Yeah. Somebody was saying something.
Sir, actually, it is the angle of twist only, sir, because we are analyzing the torsional stresses on a cross section.
Yes.
Yeah. So this theta into d by 2 is actually we are verifying for the cross section only, right? So if the cross section is twisted by theta, then that whole plane that consists of the diameter, the axial deflection, it will also incline itself by theta only. So I think it's correct only, sir. We are
Yeah,
analyzing torsional stresses for a cross section, right? So if the cross section is twisted by theta, then the whole plane, that triangle itself, which is drawn on the cross section, also gets twisted by theta.
yeah, fine. You're valid on that. Yes, yes. That is why students. Anyway, we will be. I don't think I'm just taking your notes, whatever the coordinator has given, but it does not have anything as of now. Okay, we'll see whether it is really necessary to include that. But let us consider students. Yeah, fine. Let me come back to you with one more alternative derivation. There is one more, but it was very complex, so I just wanted to skip that. But I think I have to give this explanation for you to next class. But no problem. I'll be happy to do that in the next class.
Sir, so what is
But
that delta that you showed on the next? What is it actually in the diagram? Which dimension?
which dimension? I didn't get you. Sorry.
So in the next slide, you showed us the formula for delta, right?
Yeah. Next slide.
So
Yes, yes.
what is that delta actually in the spring? It is the
In this
deflection
in
per
this
coil.
context, this delta refers to the entire spring deflection. This delta refers to entire spring deflection, also called as y. Okay, also
Okay,
called
sir.
as y. Let me remind you here, y is the notation that is used in your data handbook. Okay, we'll not confuse ourselves with so many terms. Okay, let us stick to one thing. Okay, y is one notation that is used in data handbook. Deflection of the spring. Okay, so we're equating this deflection with the deflection of the coil. Okay, of the wire. So that is why maybe because of the terminology we are having some issues, but yeah, we'll sort them out. No problem. 8 WC cube n by GD. And this equation, okay, springs, it is, let me just put it down here. I hope all of you are already having the data handbook with you for your reference. So let me put it down here. Springs in data handbook. This is chapter 11. It deals with springs, and this particular equation which we talked about, it is in 11.5a, page 170. Okay, as you have made note in the previous semester also, please make note of all the equation numbers. Okay, so yeah, chapter 11 of our data handbook. Next class, I think we can start off with, or we can discuss one problem and also move ahead. That is also there. That also we can do. Okay, in the meantime, you can copy this, students. Yeah, that was fine. So that was the first problem that we need to solve. Okay, very simple one. I think you have a class at 3:30 or 3:04. So we have a problem where you could design a helical spring to carry a load of 500 newtons, and deflection allowed is 20 mm. Allowable shear stress in the spring material is 350, and modulus of rigidity is 82.7 to 10 power 3 megapascal. Spring index is 6. So let us write down in terms of its notations, okay, that what we use in data handbook. So this F is 500 newtons. Got it? Deflection Y is 20 mm. Allowable shear stress in the spring material is, that is tau is 350 megapascal, and G value is 82.7 into 10 raised to 3 megapascals. In other words, it is 82.7 gigapascals, and spring index C is 6. What is the C? C we know as D by D. What are we supposed to do? So when we say design a helical compression spring means it is to design with all the parameters in mind. That is, what will be its coil diameter. So design means what is D, okay, what is small d, wire diameter. Okay, spring material is already given. Okay, spring material is already given. Well, how do we know? G is 82.7. So we need not go and redefine the material. So spring material is 350, allowable is already given. We need not design that. What you have to take care is D and D is done. Then next, once D you have used, you have to understand what is the standard value. What is the standard value of this? Then what will be the number of coils? Okay, in other words, what is I? What will be Y? Y deflection is 20. Yes, so using all those things, what will be the number of coils that has to be used up? Then what will be the axial gap? A, that is represented by A, axial gap between the coils. What will be the pitch? So this all constitutes in the design of a helical spring. So one of the derivations we did at first, that is, we equated the shear stress tau is equal to 8fd by pi d cube. This is into K. We told that this is a wall stress factor. So K is equal to 4c minus 1 by 4c minus 4 plus 0.615 by C. Okay. So we use, if it is not mentioned, we will go with this, keeping curvature in mind. Okay. So 8fd K into pi d cube. So K refers to, that is a wall stress correction factor which is totally dependent on the spring index 6. So if you solve this, how much you're going to get, you just calculate that. And since allowable is 350, so this is 350 equal to 8 into 500 into D. D by D cube is given. See, we do not know the value of D and also D. Individually we do not know, but we know their ratio. Ratio is 6 over here. Okay, ratio is 6. So what you can write? You can write this is 6 by pi d square into whatever K value you get here. K value, if I calculate, it should be 1.2525 for C is equal to 6. So put that same value If you solve for d, that is d square is already there, you should get around 5.22 mm. Some of the very common mistakes what people do is don't take care of the units. See, 350 megapascals. What is this 350 megapascals means? See, 350 megapascals means 350 into 10 power 6 Newton per meter square. It also means this is 350 into I can say, yeah, 10 power 6 means 350 Newton per mm square. 350 Newton per mm square. If you convert from Newton per meter square to mm square, this will be 10 power, if you have to multiply by 10 power minus 6. So that is why your value comes out to be 350 Newton per mm square. That value you are putting here. So I can write it here in brackets. This is in Newton per mm square. Okay. Left hand side. Right hand side again 500 is in Newton directly. Okay. So this is done. Then 6 is in mm. Okay. This is mm and mm here. Fine. So whatever after solving you should get 5.22 mm. So one of the common things that we have seen is they do something here Newton per meter square and try to get it in mm and so on and totally mess up the equation. Okay, so be careful with this 5.22. Okay, now standard wire, as I told you, this wires are always manufactured in some standards just as shafts that you have done. So for standard wire diameter that you require, you will have to refer to table 11.2, which is on page 188, and we'll select there under that cold drawn wire. Cold drawn steel wire. So how much you can get here looking at this table, which is the next best value? It should be 5.22 and beyond, not less than that. Hello? Yes?
.3.
Yeah, correct. So it is around 5.3 mm. Yes, 5.3 mm becomes the standard cold drawn diameter. Okay, and once D is done, then you can easily find out what is the coil diameter D, which is nothing but 6 times D. It comes out around 31.8 mm.
Sir, which column is referred to here in page 188? Is it the first column?
Okay, 180. This is yeah, that depends on which material is mentioned. If nothing is mentioned, you can take cold drawn wire, cold drawn steel wire unalloyed.
Okay.
And there is a way to look at the table. See, for example, as rightly pointed out, it is 5.3 mm, correct. But until that, you have some choice. See, 4.25 to 5, you should have an increment of 0.25. 5.3, then next size is 5.6. See, you don't have 5.5. So that you have to take care. What does that increment mean? For example, 4.25 to 5, increment is 0.25. That means it is 4.25, next size is plus 0.25, that is 4.5, then 4.75 and 5. But at the same time, there is no spring wire with 5.25. It is not mentioned at all. And in fact, the same rule goes for all the three different kinds of wires. Hardened and tempered base also, and stainless steel. So all the three, the same categories will get the same value, 5.3 itself. But anyway, as you rightly pointed out, there is nothing mentioned here. Spring material is only directly given. If nothing is mentioned, you are free to choose that particular wire. If there is one specific application mentioned, something like heat application and all that, then you would go for hardened and tempered steel wire. And some corrosive environment is mentioned, then you may choose to go for stainless steel wire. Okay, fine. I think I have to stop here right now because it's already time for you also. Yeah, it's actually 5 minutes more I've taken. So I think next class we'll be completing this problem. Yeah, we'll be completing this problem, and we'll move on to other kinds of problems, other types. We'll discuss more in detail. Okay. So thank you for joining, students,
Thank you,
today.
sir.
And please, yeah, and please make sure that your other friends also will come and attend this, because I find very less people coming here. As I already pointed out last time, you have to be very careful, because this time management may make it very seriously regarding the attendance issues. Last time, as I told you, you were in a hurry. Most of them could not have systems or books or facilities, whatever, but this time it is not so. So make sure that all of you are regular to the class. We will be keeping track of your attendance. And also, please feel free to ask questions and all that. Yes, of course, if we are not very clear with that, we can always do it in the future. So next class, I'll cover that topic for you, which we left out today, regarding the equation, that is the deflection equation, how that came out to be and what that theta means, especially. Okay, because that wordings that they have used in the derivations is somewhat misleading. Okay. Anyway, students, thank you for your time. Okay, we'll meet on Tuesday, 8 to 9:30.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.